Hey everybody, I thought I would actually do a sort of formal tutorial for how I animate in Krita. So I guess first things first, I'm gonna split it up into a couple parts. So I'm gonna talk about setting up the workspace to specifically animate in Krita. Then we're gonna actually animate. Then we're gonna talk about exporting, and then I'll talk about some random other stuff I think is useful if you are looking to animate in Krita. So first things first, new file. There are animation templates, but I personally don't use them, so I'm just gonna make a standard HD resolution new document with just 72 ppi, because that's what you do if you're drawing for computer stuff. So first things first, your Krita layout might look something kind of like this, where it's, geared towards drawing and whatnot. Now, if you've just installed Krita, I think there is a animation workspace, but I remember I didn't really like it, so for right now we're just gonna make our own makeshift workspace. So if you go to settings and dockers, there's two dockers that you'll want. The animation docker, which I like having it scrunched over here in the corner, and then the second docker you'll want is the timeline right there, and it just popped right there, just pretty nice. Now also, the nice thing about the animation docker is you can just press this little button, and you also get the onion skin docker, and it's kind of convenient because you can just press that little button and it'll disappear and reappear, all that good stuff for when you're onion skinning things. So another thing I think is worthwhile is to change keyboard shortcuts. So if you go to settings, configure Krita, and keyboard shortcuts, if you just type in frame, I recommend changing create blank frame to something if you come from Adobe Animate, you could change it to F7, which is, make a blank keyframe in Flash. And then also next keyframe and previous keyframe is really helpful, because if you're just flipping back and forth between drawings, that just makes it a little bit easier instead of having to scrub, go back to the timeline to draw and go back to the timeline to draw. So that's all I got for setting up the workspace. So let's actually animate something. So this is kind of like a watered down way of how I animate stuff, because obviously it's a tutorial and I just want to make it fast. But I'm just gonna draw a sphere, a circle, let's say. So I just hit those, that backspace button was what I had as the keyboard shortcut for blank frame. You can also just, if you hate keyboard shortcuts, you can also go, wait, this one is to make a new blank keyframe. But I think it's time consuming to have to do that, so I'm just gonna use my keyboard shortcuts. So let's draw a circle man, and they shall be smiling. Now onion skin, you can turn it on here in the layers thing, or in the timeline you can turn that little light bubble on and off to turn onion skin off. Now another thing, if you go to the onion skin, if you don't like having your previous frame be blue or red, you can just click this little arrow thing and then click whatever color if you want it to be green or whatever. I like it blue and red, that's just who I am inside. And then if you have this 0 off, you won't see any in-betweens, but I don't know why you would turn that off, because it's kind of confusing when you turn onion skin on here and you're like, oh, why am I not seeing anything? And then you realize, oh, I had that little 0 off. So don't do that. For, I don't know, maybe there's a real reason you might want to do that, but I think not. So I'm just gonna waste all of your guys' time and draw this beautiful, beautiful smiley face the next 10 seconds. And we can make him squash more. Look at this beautiful squash and stretch, guys. This is animation 101. Oh, okay, so here's another thing I think is really useful when doing line work. If you hit F5 in Krita, you'll bring up the little brush editor thing, and I really recommend having this setting off, or on, eraser with eraser switch size. That just means when you're drawing with whatever brush, like right now I'm just drawing with a pen brush default kind of thing. When you hit E or whatever you have set to make it go into eraser mode, it'll switch to its own custom, like, you know, size that it had that's independent of the drawing brush. And that's just really nice for if you're drawing junk and you're like, oh, I need to erase this big section, and it's just very fast to do it that way. So I'm just gonna finish this up. And so if we want to make this have like a good loop, let's say we end it on frame 5. So obviously your start frame is 0 and your end frame we can set to 5. And then we can see it bounce, and it's oh so beautiful. That is the beautifulest smiley face I've ever drawn in my life. Now there's this weird glitch. I can't remember if they've fixed it, because I'm actually using a older version of Krita just because. But there's this weird glitch where if you have the onion skin on, whoops, my bad, and then you go to use the paint bucket tool, it'll like, here, let me turn off the onion skin. You see this? I can't remember if they fixed this in Krita 4.2, but I should probably like report this bug to them if they haven't fixed it. But otherwise, just turn off the onion skin when you're doing bucket tool stuff. Now also, because Krita, like by default, will only show whatever layer on the timeline that you're currently on, you can just right click on the layer name and then go to add existing layer, and then, so I want to look at my lines layer, so I'll just bring that up. And then now you can see, you know, what layer you want, and it'll stay that way. If you say go to a different layer, you can still always see your lines layer. So if you like having, you know, all your layers visible, just right click that little name right there. Now I guess I'll just color him, and actually I don't like red, let's make him blue. A blue man, if you will. And he's looking pretty good. Now, just another random little thing for animating in Krita. Here, I can just turn off the color layer for right now. If you select your frame and hold down Control and then drag that, it'll make a copy of that frame. So if I drag out, like, let's say this is, you know, frame number 2, and I hold down Control and then I drag it to a new place, I've made a copy of that, you know, second frame. So if you need to like make, I don't know, like a loop, and you want to copy all these for whatever reason, it's just a fast way to copy. And then obviously selecting, if you want to select all your frames, you just hold down and you can select them all and move them. It's pretty convenient, pretty straightforward, which is really nice. Another thing with animating, if you have, I recommend having this, wait, yes, no, I recommend having this on, not with the X, having it on, because if you, okay, so let's make a mark. Now I've made a duplicate of this previous frame, but you know, with whatever mark, and that can just be kind of useful because you can select this frame and then maybe move it, and then you just make another quick mark, and then you select it again, and then you move it again, and then you can make another mark, and then you just select it and then move it again. And it's just kind of an easy way to like move stuff. But usually I will just like make a mark with the eraser, and that will also do it. So like if I just erase all these marks, it's made a new drawing, which is kind of convenient, but it's just easier for me to show if I actually, you know, make a mark than if I just tap the eraser somewhere random and then it makes a new frame. So I think that's useful, but if you don't like that, you can turn that off, and then when I make a new mark, it is on this frame. So just depending whatever style you like, whether or not have that on or off. I like having it on. So let's turn my color back on. So another little technical thing with Krita, if you want to make a clipping layer or a mask layer or whatever, they're all kind of like the same thing. Just select whatever layer you want and then hit Control-Shift-G, and that will just make a nice little masking layer. You can also hit right click and then go to group and then quick clipping group. It'll do the same thing, but I like hitting Control-Shift-G just because it's a bit faster. So I'm just gonna drag this line art layer under there. So I'm now gonna shade. So I'm just gonna call this multiply. And because it has this little alpha sign, I think it's an alpha sign, whatever, it's a fish or something. Because it has this turned on, it will clip to this layer below it. So I'm just gonna make some new frames. Oh, did I not color? Oh, my bad. I didn't color all these frames. It's totally my bad. Let me just color them real quick. Okay. So I'll set this layer to multiply, because this is how I usually shade. And then another thing I recommend is if you get the palette docker from, remember if you go to settings, dockers, and then palette, if it's not already there for you. I like using like a kind of like a light purple to shade my stuff when in multiply mode. I think it just looks kind of nice. And it's just a quick way, and if you have it saved to your palette, you can always just grab it again when you're, you know, shading and then coloring, and then you're doing line art, and then you can shade again. It's just kind of a really fast way to do it. Actually, I think the shadow should be maybe more down there. Let's make this just a bit more down like that. So if we hit play, look, you have a little bouncing guy and he's got a shadow. It's totally beautiful. Now, another thing, so I like usually to color my line art, but the way you would do that, if you have like the lines within this clipping group, you can just make another clipping group within this clipping group, if that makes sense. So I'll name this lines color, and then I'm actually just gonna go to my bucket tool and hit you could hit fill entire selection or limit to current layer, it doesn't really matter. And then I'll just make like maybe like a purple or something. Oh, that doesn't look quite right. Yeah, that looks good. And then you can just like easily color the line art without having, like if I didn't have this group within a group, it would color like, you know, this entire thing would be like that dark purple. But I mean, you could also just get away with it by just making a group outside of here, but I'll show you why I kind of don't like doing that. So if I make another layer, and I'll name this overlay, and set it to overlay, I think it looks really nice if you have just a subtle gradient. Use like an airbrush. This is like the default airbrush in Krita. And then you can just kind of, you know, have a nice little yellow where the light's coming from, and then like a, you know, like a blue, a dark blue or a purple where the shadows are. You can just kind of give your stuff a little more form. Actually, I think I'll go a little more saturated maybe. Let's see. I don't know. You know, you see, it just gives it a little more three-dimensionality, if that's a word. And it kind of just stays consistent the entire time, which is kind of nice. Now, one thing I'm not going to bother with, like actually doing in the tutorial, is put audio in it. Now, this little microphone thing, see, if you just click that microphone in the timeline, you can go to Open Audio, and Krita will accept your MP3 or WAV file. Krita's a bit laggy when you have audio imported. I mean, just like the audio itself, like when you scrub the timeline, you know, it's kind of hard to time out where things are if you're having like a lip sync, like if you're lip syncing something or you want it to be exactly on beat. It can be a bit laggy, but that's because Krita was made for drawing, and animation is just like a secondary feature. So, let me see if I have anything else. I think that's all I wanted to talk about for like actually animating. So now I guess I'll talk about exporting in Krita. So go to whatever browser you like, and Krita has a pretty nice manual online, which I totally recommend if you have any questions. It's probably somewhere in the manual. But so to export your animation, you're gonna want to download FFmpeg, which I can get here at this website. I don't know, maybe there's other places to get it, but get whatever latest version, and I'm running a 64-bit computer, and static's kind of like recommended. Now, once you have that downloaded, obviously unzip the folder with all the files. And if you want to render out your animation, just go to File, Render Animation. And when you first open up rendering animation with Krita, this little file will be blank, so just hit the little folder button and it will probably bring you like to your desktop. So wherever you have that folder unzipped, so for example I saved it under software, and then this is the actual folder. If you go to bin and then you select FFmpeg, again I don't totally know if that's how you pronounce it, but just select it, and then now you can export your animation, and you can obviously export it as a GIF or a MP4, and I have no idea what Matroska or OGG video are. It's just kind of I don't know what those are, but you can just export and obviously include your audio if I had audio, just by hitting OK. Now the other thing is Krita, at least last I checked, maybe they're working on it or something, but if you say want to export a transparent GIF, because you know GIFs honor transparency, so if I were to turn this layer off, now it would just be this little blue circle smiley face and there would be no background. But if you go to render it as a GIF with you know a transparent background, Krita won't honor that transparency as of yet. So it would export it with like a black background, you know, a solid black color. But what you can do to get around that is you can export a PNG image sequence, and then the PNGs that it exports will obviously honor transparency. And then you can just use that PNG image sequence and export it or convert it into like a GIF or a video or whatever using some third-party software, you know, some other thing. So that's how you can kind of get around if you want to export transparent GIFs. Oh yeah, sorry, there was one other thing I didn't mention, which isn't really about exporting, but there is a animation curves Stalker. Now personally I never use this, and in Krita it's meant for kind of tweening in the program, but I never use it because it only tweens opacity right now. I mean, maybe in the future they'll have it so that you can tween transformations and movements and stuff like that, like in other animation programs like Flash. But it's only used for if you want to, like, you know, make this guy go from this to like invisible or like 50% transparent. So I don't really use it, and I feel like a lot of people don't really use it. So I guess for the random junk I was going to talk about, I recommend, here, let me open up my software folder. There's a couple software I totally recommend using alongside Krita, because remember, Krita is first of all a drawing program. Like, you know, it's basically a free alternative to Photoshop, which is pretty nice because it's totally free and it basically does everything Photoshop does. But it does have its limitations. So like with audio, you can only import one audio file. As of right now, maybe in the future they'll upgrade it a bit, who knows. But I recommend using something like Audacity, which is a free audio editing program. If you want to, you know, record some sort of audio or combine two things and then export it as one. That way you can just use this, and then whatever you make in Audacity, you can just import it into Krita. Obviously, probably most of you know what Blender is, but it's... Oh, sorry, my cat is meowing. She brought me napkins. Yeah, so Blender is... she's going crazy. I need to pet her, I'm sorry. Okay, so Blender, it's grease pencil, like, what would you call it, like extension or add-on within Blender, is really good. And obviously you could maybe 3D model like buildings or something in Blender, and then export like a, I don't know, some sort of anime fights kind of scene, but without the characters, and you know, just the camera's moving around the buildings or something, and you can go to File and import animation frames and just kind of like trace over those frames to like rotoscope those buildings. If you want to like do that with Krita, because it's easier to draw in Krita in my opinion than in Blender, even though Blender does have some pretty good brushes and junk. It takes a little bit more computer power from my experience. And the other thing I recommend is OpenToons. Is basically kind of like if you don't know what that is, it's kind of like what Studio Ghibli sort of used to use, but I think they have their own version of OpenToons that they've kind of made for animating. I find it really good to say import audio into OpenToons and then just scrub around that audio to find like maybe on frame 10 you can make a mark that your character or whatever is saying, like this and such sound. You can kind of make an X sheet within OpenToons, because scrubbing audio in OpenToons is more what would you say? It's like better. It's just easier to scrub audio in OpenToons than in like Krita or something. DaVinci Resolve is another free program. It's basically like Adobe Premiere, but free. So if you want to like make a bunch of short animations in Krita and then drag those into DaVinci Resolve, I totally recommend that, because it's kind of like an industry level program for video editing, but it's totally free. And then I guess also Handbrake, that's just a free program if you don't know. Like I use it for when I make an animation and then I want to post it on like Twitter or Instagram or something. You can just like what's the word, compress the file so that you can post it on those sites. And I guess that's basically all I have. So yeah, I guess my last little thing is I recommend Krita because it's totally free, and it's basically like Photoshop but free, and you don't have to pay for it because it's free, and Photoshop is dumb. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Maybe like 2 of you learned something. Yeah, just ask questions in the comments because I like usually always answer them. Yeah, so I guess goodbye. Thank you so much. Bye.